use you in our advertising campaign. Hallelujah. All right. See, you're all clustered together to keep warm here today. Okay, I'll have to probably get a thing in my neck here now. You guys ready? All right, we're looking at Introduction to Biblical Counseling, and we're getting close to the end of the course here. We've got about 4 more lessons left, and 2 today and 2 next time. And today we're looking at the subject of counseling cautions. We have talked about a lot of different things when it comes to the whole counseling process, and we want to just highlight a few cautionary areas when it comes to this ministry in the church, especially as you function in and among people. There's a number of cautions that are important to be aware of in the ministry of counseling. And I'm sure you've heard about counseling problems at times, and people get into trouble and so forth. And obviously, when we talk about this, we want to minimize those kinds of situations for you and everybody else that's involved. There's a few of these that might be slightly repeated from things that we've said through the course, but I felt like it was good to maybe repeat a couple of them just so that we kind of have them all together in one place. Roman numeral 1 here, there are some cautions relative to the counseling schedule. And this is particularly applicable to long-term counseling situations. Thank you, Marie. Long-term situations where you are going to be meeting ongoing for a while. Some of these won't really apply to the one-time session that you might have with people. But if you ever get into situations where you're going to be meeting on a regular basis, these cautions, I think, would be appropriate to you. Letter A, work counselees into your schedule. I've talked about this before, and I'm going to repeat it again simply because it's so critical, I think, to the health of the long-term process. You do not want to continually take time away from your family and what God has put as priorities in your life in this area of counseling. What can happen is that everybody wants to meet at the same time. They want to meet when in the evenings. They want to meet after work. They want to meet here maybe on a Saturday or so forth, which is generally, for most people, family time. Especially if you still have young children at home, or even if you just have a spouse at home, that's usually family time. And what I find is if we're not careful, we end up losing our family, but we save the world. And the truth of the matter is, I don't believe that when it comes to ministry, God ever expects us to put our family on the altar. I'm not saying that occasionally you can't schedule something in the evening and so forth, especially when you're dealing with maybe what seems to be more of an emergency situation. But I think for the regular and for the normal kinds of situations, you want to work people into your schedule. One of the things that we do at the church, we provide counseling for people, and we don't charge for that. Now, if you go out into the world system, they're going to charge, and they're going to charge handsomely for that. I don't know if you've ever looked at some of the rates that people charge for psychologists or psychiatrists or other kinds of professional counselors. They actually charge quite a bit of money. It's on par with doctors and lawyers and those kinds of people. Well, they're considered professionals. Now, if they were going to a professional like that, they would obviously be paying out good money, and there would be some sort of a cost involved for them. Now, as people in the church, we don't charge for our counseling. Not that it's not worth just as much, by the way, as every other kind of counseling. But as a result, you know, what are they putting into the process? Well, what they put into the process is getting a couple hours off of work, or doing what they do when they have a dental appointment, what they do when they have a doctor's appointment, and they just get that time off. Sometimes they don't do it because they're embarrassed to ask, well, we're going, well, what's it for? Well, it's for marriage counseling. I don't want to say that to my boss, you know. But it's easier to say, well, I have a sore throat and I need to do this. But I think it's critical that we, as much as possible, try to work them into our schedule. People who are not willing to invest some of their resources into solving their own problems maybe are not quite desperate enough yet for their problems to be fixed. And like I say, there may be some exceptions to this general rule depending upon the circumstances of the parties involved. Maybe it's a single mom and so forth. There's a desperate situation, and you're going to make an exception. But if the exception becomes the rule, then it's going to be hard on you as a counselor. And so it's very, very important to try to work it into a situation that's comfortable for you, because if you're thinking about all the other things you should be doing, if you think about all the other prices that you're paying to help them, then you're not going to be giving them your very best in counsel either. So I think it's important to try to do that. Letter B, keep counseling sessions to a specified length. I've heard of people in these 3.5, 4-hour counseling sessions. I think to myself, oh my God, how can anybody even be still in their right mind at that point in time? There's a mental weariness that comes, and there comes a point in time where you're just going over the same stuff and same stuff and same stuff over and over and over again. And oftentimes you're trying to talk people into things. And I always tell people up front how long the session is going to be. And I think this is something that you as a counselor need to be in control of. Now, sometimes the first session will be a little bit longer because you're kind of gathering data. You're getting to know them maybe for the first time, and you're trying to get as much information as possible. And so it might be a little more extended. Obviously, you're not dealing into any of the heavy stuff. But I usually tell them, listen, I have scheduled so much time for this session. And that is when we will be closing, because I have another whatever to do afterwards or something. And so that when we do start getting close to that time, and I'm kind of keeping my eye on the time, and I think it's good to have a clock position somewhere where you don't have to keep going like this, because when you go like that, people think you're trying to get out of something. And but when you start getting close to the end, you in your mind are starting to wind this thing up for the day. You're not going to solve all the world's problems in 1 hour. And so you know you're going to be meeting again. You know you're going to be talking again. But I think it's good to try to keep your sessions to within the context of 1 hour. 45 minutes to an hour should be enough time to spend on that particular problem at that particular time. And then reschedule your appointment. Depending upon the nature of what you're doing, you might reschedule the next week, or you might reschedule the next 2 weeks or next month, depending upon the pace in which you are going in this process. Letter C, give ample time in between sessions so that they can work some things out. This is why it's not good to okay, we're going to meet today, and then we're going to meet tomorrow, and then we're going to meet the next day after that. No, you need to give people time to absorb what has been said in that particular session, and give them some time to maybe work out what has been said. Sometimes even a week between sessions is not enough time for them, because you know how a week can go sometimes. And if it's a busy week in your life, it just seems like it's gone, and then we're here again, and they really haven't had a chance to really digest or really absorb or maybe even do the homework that you asked them to do. And so sometimes it's better to pace the thing and give some time in between. And what I generally start out, depends upon how serious the problem is, I'll start out with appointment, then the next week if it's a real serious thing, a real crisis kind of a thing. But if it's not, I'll do every 2 weeks, and then I'll move it eventually to once a month, just so that they have time to work it out. Because if you're kind of one of those situations where you keep dumping more and more and more and more and more on people, and you never give them time to do the work in between, it gets frustrating to everybody, and then it almost becomes counterproductive to what you're wanting to do. So give ample time in between. Letter D, don't be afraid to take a time out from counseling. A time out from counseling. You may have met with somebody for 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and you realize, there's been a lot of stuff said, there's a lot of things that have happened here, and they really need some time just to kind of, maybe give them a month off, give them 2 months off, and say, okay, we're going to meet again such and such a date. In the meantime, you work on some of the things we've talked about and be ready to report to me when we pick up again. Now, you can schedule an actual date for that time when you pick up. It's called a timeout. There's actually a follow-up appointment coming up, but it also, again, gives them time to absorb some of those things. Letter E, know when to end the counseling process. What I have found in many cases is that during this process, if you're meeting with people on a regular basis, if it's once a week or every other week or even once a month, it isn't long before you actually start becoming friends with the people that you're meeting with, and they start being friends with you. And depending upon the level of their other relationships, they may actually look forward to this as just a good time of fellowship. And they look forward to their appointments. And I have been in situations before where people just enjoy the time because they get some very quality dialogue, and you can talk about just about anything, and they start looking forward to the sessions more like this is more like fellowship now than it is counseling. And unfortunately, when it gets to that process, that's the time to quit doing it. Not that you don't want to have fellowship with people. It's just that that's not the purpose for the time getting together it that way. You can have fellowship at other times. And really the whole process, you want to start encouraging them to build friendships with other people that are real and genuine and so forth. But that's where they become overly dependent upon you. There needs to be an end to the counseling process. When you perceive that you've said everything that needs to be said and they're actually making some real positive changes in their life towards a solution, you might just have to say to them at some point, you know what, I think we're coming to a place where we should be ending this process. Doesn't mean we can't have an annual checkup and just touch base from time to time to see how things are going, or maybe talk in the hallway or so forth. But as far as the formal process is going, I think it's probably time to bring it to an end. And then in the process of terminating it, you should actually celebrate this as a graduation. Rather than seeing it as a negative, see it as a positive. It's like graduating from one level of school. Hey, okay, you're going to the next level now. That's a good thing. And so we celebrate at that point. Let's have a little party next time. We'll have cookies and some sparkling beverage, and then we will kiss everybody goodbye and see you in life. And you will see them in life if they are around the church. So these are just some guidelines that I suggest for the whole counseling schedule. Now let's look at Roman numeral 2 there. There are some cautions relative to the counselor. Cautions relative to the counselor. And again, a couple of these we've mentioned before, but we'll put them here with the rest of these that we haven't mentioned before. Letter A, be sure you hear all sides of a matter before you render judgment. Be sure to hear all sides of a matter before you render judgment. Well, this isn't just true in counseling. This is true in every area of life. It's so easy to be in a conversation with somebody and somebody starts to gossip or they start to talk about another person. And before you know it, you're mad at that other person and you haven't even met him. And because whenever anybody tells a story, they always tell a story in a way that puts themselves in the best light. And I think I shared this before with you. You know, you get a lady coming in and says her husband is domineering and he's suppressing and he won't let her spend any money and she barely can get enough money to buy groceries for the family and and so all of a sudden you're really, really mad at this man because he's so mean and nasty to his wife, and then you get a chance to talk to the man and you find out she's run up huge amounts on the credit cards, and she hasn't really been able to be trusted with money. He gives her money for groceries, she goes spends it on something else, and then we don't have money for the groceries, and then you start getting mad at her. So you're mad at him, and now you're mad at her, but the thing is you didn't really have the full story. So resist the urge to empathize with the person who came to you first. First one that gets there gets the counselor on his side. No, not necessarily. I've had couples come in for counseling where the wife was really pushing for counseling because she thought her husband needed all this adjustment. Well, the deeper we got into the counseling process, I started to sympathize with the husband. I'm thinking, no way, this lady is very demanding. I don't know that Jesus could have satisfied her as a husband. And I start to be, the whole thing starts to shift. And usually when that happens, usually then the woman isn't quite as interested in counseling before. As long as you're picking on the husband, it's fine, but please don't pick on me, kind of a thing. And that's the other side of this. Don't resist the urge to identify with a particular gender. Here's a basic rule you can remember. Women are not always right, and men are not always wrong. Sometimes I think when we get into the counseling process, because women tend to be more sensitive, and they're usually more open to counsel than men are, there's a tendency to maybe just kind of have a bias. I know that's my natural tendency, is have a bias to believe that the woman is probably right. I know in my own life, my wife's usually right. If she says I'm doing something wrong, I usually am. So, but don't resist that urge, because if you start to develop a bias in your counseling, it'll be picked up in the counselees, and they know they're not going to get a fair trial. It's kind of like the judge, that it's a trial about such and such, and he's deeply involved in that situation. So you're not going to get a fair hearing. Now, when more than one person is involved in the counseling process, it's best to get both parties together when you're going to talk. If it's a married couple, get husband and wife together. Or if it's some kind of a business conflict in the church or interpersonal conflict in the church, get both parties together, because what you'll find is that people tend to be more truthful, honest, and accurate, and a little bit reserved when the other party is there to hear their comments. And, they can be very accusatory when the person is not there, and they can make statements about what this person said and what this person did. But when they're actually present, when they're saying those things, usually they're a little more accurate in how they are bringing them forth. And so it helps us a lot in that situation. So try to get the parties that are involved together when there's more than one party involved. All right, letter B, do not answer a matter before you hear it. We've talked about that. We have to we've already emphasized this point in a previous session, but take the time that's necessary to give appropriate attention to the problem at hand. Gather as much information as possible. Make sure you fully understand the situation before you start offering solutions. If you're like me and most leaders can think faster than most people can talk. And oftentimes in your mind, you're running way ahead of people, and you know where they're going before they get there, and so you're just kind of saying, come on, hurry up and say it out. I know where you're going with. And so there's a tendency, and I have this tendency, and it's something I have to work on constantly, is interrupting people while they're trying to tell me something, because I know exactly where they're going. But a couple times I'm wrong. I don't really know exactly where they're going. I think I know where they're going, but that's not where they're going. And then it becomes frustrating to them and everybody else if I interrupt the process. And I think anybody that's a leader kind of has that tendency a little bit, because one of the features that one of the attributes, if you want to call it that God gives to leaders is the ability to kind of think ahead and see ahead and see where things are going and see the implication of things. And there's like an intuitiveness about certain things. And yet that can be your own worst enemy when it comes to the counseling process, because you'll want to interrupt them in the flow of things and not really hear the matter. And then you're giving advice and answers for questions that they're not asking. And all of a sudden they say, well, that's a great comment, Pastor, but that's not really what I'm talking about, or that's not really where I was going. And that becomes a little bit embarrassing. And so you want to make sure you hear a matter before you judge it. The Bible says it's foolishness if you do that anyway. Letter C, don't presume that people know the Bible or the basic principles of the Bible. I think in a culture like South Africa or America or countries that seem to have kind of a Christian base in them, and a lot of the schools in South Africa teach the Bible, and it's maybe even more than in the U.S. In the U.S., the Bible used to be the basic textbook, and people generally, just about everybody that you talk to, went to Sunday school. I was listening to the radio the other day here in South Africa. There was some a lady singer who has become quite famous in South Africa, and the presenter was interviewing her and asking her about how she learned to sing and so forth. Well, I never really had any lessons. I started singing when I was in church. You watch programs like American Idol and those kind of things. Just about every one of those winners started learning to sing in church, because that's where singing is done a lot. And so you start to presume that everybody knows things, and of course then you see these other quiz programs where somebody's asking questions about the Bible and. Who baptized Jesus? Moses. Moses baptized Jesus, what, in the Nile, right? Yeah, in the river Nile. And he put him in a basket and gave him back to his mother. How did that work? Some of these answers to these questions are absolutely baffling. You think, well, certainly they know the story of Noah. Certainly they know the story of... But no, they don't. And I've been teaching Bible school for nearly 35 years, and one of the things that you used to be able to kind of presume that these young people coming in to study for the ministry actually knew the stories of the Bible, but you can't presume that when you're talking to people. You can't presume that they know what the Bible... Well, you know what the Bible says. What? No, they don't know what the Bible says. And so one of the cautions is don't presume too much. Now, the other extreme, I suppose, is belaboring a point when it's obvious that they do know. But on the other hand, don't presume that they automatically know. I think it's surprising how many Christians today do not really have a regular plan of Bible reading. They may watch Christian TV and stuff like that, but they're not really getting the Bible in any systematic way. They're usually getting the same few scriptures that everybody preaches on when they're on the radio or TV. And they're really not getting a thorough understanding of the Scripture. So many of those who do have regular plans still have difficult time applying the Word of God to their own lives. And so sometimes when you're trying to help people understand the Word and apply it to their lives, you have to take a little bit more time than maybe you would be naturally inclined to do. Letter D, don't counsel when you are emotionally and physically exhausted. Obviously, when you're having trouble yourself, it's going to be hard for you to be much of an answer to other people. And the truth of the matter is you have to be honest with where you're at. Now, most of the time, I avoid this by, most of my counseling appointments are very early in the morning. The earlier I get people out, the better for me. So most of my counseling appointments are like at 7 o'clock in the morning. But at least they're in the morning season where I'm going to be at my best. I'm going to be fresh. Now, maybe you say, I'm not a morning person. That would be a terrible time for me. Okay, what is your good time? What is your good time? What is your best time? But sometimes if you wait until the day's gone by, so many things can happen in that day where you actually become very exhausted yourself. But let's just say you're in a situation where you have an appointment scheduled with somebody and you know that you are in terrible straits. I mean, you're sick. You should be probably going to the doctor yourself. You're running a temperature, and now you're going to press through as the mighty man and woman of God that you are. Well, you're not doing anybody a favor by doing that, I'm telling you right now. Because I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation where you just said to yourself, I can't wait until this is over. I can't wait until I'm out of here. Why won't they shut up? I got problems of my own. And you're not even thinking about what they're saying. You're not doing anybody any good. It's better just to be honest, just like a counselee at times will call and say, you know what, I don't think we can meet today because of thus and thus. And there may be times when you just simply have to say and call a counselor. Hopefully you can do it ahead of time before they actually arrive. But you can call them and say, you know what, I'm really not at my best today. You don't have to necessarily give all the reasons, but I just think it would be wise if we maybe postponed our appointment until, and then give them hope for the next time. But I think sometimes you have to be honest with yourself. Because again, if you're not at your best, you're not going to be giving your best. And actually, you're prone to maybe make some mistakes in times like that because you're not really hearing, you're not really listening, you're not really alert. And I do believe in counseling, one of the biggest things you need to be is alert to what's going on around you. So just give some thought to that. Letter E, don't counsel over your head, but refer counselees to where they can get help. Again, we've touched on this one before as well, but again, I just want to reiterate it. When you suddenly get into a situation and you know that you've never seen or heard anything like this, and it is so far over your head, you feel like you're drowning. Don't just press on because of pride or anything else. It's not a bad thing to say that I don't know everything. It's not a bad thing to say, you know what, I've never been here before and I don't have a lot of confidence. It's a lot worse when you go to a mechanic in a auto repair shop and you bring your car in there. He's never seen the kind of car you have or the kind of engine that you have in your car, but he believes he can fix anything given enough time and money. and so he says, no problem, we can do this. And then you come back and he's practically destroyed your car because he didn't know what he was doing. Well, we don't want that to happen. We're dealing with people's lives. We're not dealing with cars. And so we don't want to get to that point where we just start making things up as we go. And just like in the medical profession, if you go to see a doctor and he says, you know what, you need to see a specialist. We don't feel like, oh, bad doctor, shame on you. Come on, you need to go back to school and you should know everything about everything. No, everybody's not going to know everything about everything. And I think you will grow in your confidence and so forth. But when you know that you're there, it's not wrong just to look people and say, you know what, some of the things that you're sharing with me now, I have to honestly say, I don't know that I'm the best person to be talking to you. But I think we can get some help for you and then, pass it along to the pastoral department. We'll turn it over to Paul, and he can sort out anything. So we know that. So he'll take it over from there. So don't counsel when you know it's over your head, and you may be able to assess that quite early in the process. I mean, if some of you are involved with Pastor Jenny, involved in some of the women's counseling, and she says, I'd like you to go visit this person and talk to this person, and suddenly you realize, you know what, I don't know anything about demon possession. I don't know anything about this, that, or the other thing. And you sort of feel like, you know what, this is out of my league. Well, don't be afraid to go back and say, you know what, I really think this is not going to work for me. And just be honest with yourself and where you're at. We all are in a growing process. And I can tell you right now, there's a lot of things I feel confident in handling right now that 20, 30 years ago I wouldn't have even gone near. Letter F, don't pontificate. Now, if I knew what that meant, I'd tell you what I mean by that. No, don't pontificate. Pontificating is like preaching at people. Don't preach at people. Sometimes when people get into counseling, and we can do this with our own children at times, we preach at them. And sometimes if we aren't careful, we will do the same thing with people who come to talk to us. These are adults. These are people that are on peer level with us for the most part. And we shouldn't be preaching. I think as soon as you get into a kind of a preaching tone of voice, people shut off and they don't listen to you anymore. I think the calmer you can be, the more relaxed you can be. I mean, sometimes, you know, when you watch a film and they show this psychologist, he's barely engaged in the process at all, just so laid back, so relaxed. That may be an extreme, but really the whole point is to get people to talk and not react to you as the person, so that now it complicates the problem, or maybe they don't feel comfortable sharing. Also, preaching tends to give the impression that you've never had a problem yourself, or that you're intolerant of those who do. You know, and sometimes when we get preachy with people, it does kind of project the idea, well, I'm holier than you, and I've never really had a problem like this, and what do you think you're doing, and why you're like, quit. Well, it's not going to be helpful in establishing a lot of rapport and a sense of openness with the counselee. So be careful about that. Try to listen to yourself as if you were talking to yourself in a sense, and try to hear your own words if you think you can, and the way in which you're phrasing things and wording things so that you're not coming across in kind of a preachy tone. I'm sure you've all seen this in conversation where all of a sudden somebody starts preaching at you and you're just kind of, whoa, I don't think I want to engage in this. Letter G, follow the guidelines that have been given by leadership. Follow the guidelines that have been given by leadership. If you've been delegated authority by leadership to counsel, never go beyond the established guidelines without prior permission from those from whom those guidelines were given. Don't assume that the situation in which you find yourself is an exemption to the rule. Sometimes when you feel like, okay, I'm approaching an area here where my natural inclination will be to do something other than what I have been given as a guideline. Sometimes you just have to say, you know what, I think we should hold it right here. I need to talk to the pastoral staff. I need to talk to Pastor so-and-so or whoever, and just see what if they agree with what I want to tell you right at this point or whatever. Just to kind of put a little pause button there a little bit to check it out before you go beyond or go in territory that has not really been prescribed for you. And so I think that's very, very critical, because that's where we sometimes get into trouble with our people that are over us, and it's difficult because we do want to be saying the same thing. We do want to be in unity when it comes to how we handle various things, because that's part of the strength of the church, is to have that. Letter H, do not contradict or question counsel that has been given to the counselee by another minister or counselor without checking out their statements. This is a real problem, because what happens is people will come to you, especially these professional counselees. People have been to counseling before. They've talked to leaders before. They've talked to pastors before. One of the questions on your information gathering sheet is, have you ever talked to anybody about this before? And then what counsel were you given? And I'm telling you, people come up with some wild things that have been told them to do. And they will say, well, this pastor or this person told me to do thus and thus. And you're thinking, what? I can't believe that a pastor would tell you that. That's what you're thinking. That's not what you're saying. And there's a tendency to badmouth that pastor. But you know what? I have found people hear what they want to hear, and they're very selective in their hearing. And if they come away from a conversation, because people have accused me of saying some things before, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I've ever said that to a human being in my entire life. I'm mean, but I'm not that mean. I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. I would never tell somebody like that. Well, you told me maybe my answer was just go and hang myself. No, I know I would never tell somebody that, but I mean, that's as bad as it gets sometimes. People will almost accuse you of saying things. And you think to yourself, I didn't say that. And if you just tend to believe everything that you hear, that's called gullibility. You tend to believe everything the counselor tells you about what everybody said to them, and this person said to them, and what Pastor James said to them, and this person said to them. I'm telling you, you're going to get in trouble. And so you just want to be very careful. You say, well, I know that pastor. He's a great pastor. I have a hard time maybe believing that. Why don't I do this? Let me talk to that pastor before we get going too far here and find out from him exactly what they told you. Now, they might start backpedaling at that. Well, that isn't exactly how he said it. Or they still might be thoroughly convinced that that's what he said. And then when you talk to the pastor, it's like they take one sentence out of context, out of a whole paragraph of things that were said, and that is what they focused in on because that's what hit them the hardest, and that's all they can remember. They can't remember the lead up to it or the exit strategy from that comment, and maybe the comment was made. And the pastor might say, yeah, I did say that to him actually, but here's what I said before, and here's what I said after. Oh, that does put it into context. I mean, Jesus said some pretty wild things to some people too. If you just took a couple of words out, and you could say, well, did you know what Jesus said? Hey, wait a minute, before I contradict Jesus, let's back up a little bit. Maybe I'll go ask him, see what he said. But just be careful about contradicting other counsel. And sometimes if I don't know the person, I say, well, you might have misunderstood them. If they are a Christian, they're a Christian pastor, I really doubt that this is what they meant, at least, when they said this to you. Try not to side against this other counsel because you may again get into problems in the future. So you may have to call another time out so you can check it out. But be careful about that. Letter I, guard your tongue so that you do not have to repent yourself. What you don't want to have to do is sin while you're in the counseling process. Colossians 4:6 says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. But in our course on Victorious Christianity, we talked about the various sins of the tongue. I think we had 22 sins of the tongue. And unfortunately, sometimes in the counseling process, we can be guilty of the very things that we're condemning in others. We can be guilty of backbiting and gossip and slander and talebearing and all these kinds of things if we aren't careful. We've got to be careful in this whole counseling process what we do with the information that we learn in the process. This really leads to the whole discussion of confidentiality when it comes to the counseling process. We haven't talked about confidentiality a lot here in this course when it comes to the area of counseling. It is a subject that we spend 2 full sessions on in the pastoral ministry course. So I'd encourage you, if you're going to be a counselor, to check into Lesson 11 and 12 in the pastoral ministry class where it'll be given thorough treatment. I'll just say a few things about it here. But this is very, very critical. As soon as you lose people's confidence, where they don't believe they can trust you with information, you lose your ability to counsel anybody. And if you start developing a reputation for being somebody that has loose lips and that what is said to you becomes public knowledge, forget it. You will have no ministry to people and you will begin to develop a reputation. The Bible teaches us that if we develop that kind of reputation, it's almost impossible to lose it. You know, Pastor Iverson used to say, and he's going to be here for our ministers' conference, he used to say, you know, if you get a reputation for rising early, you can sleep till noon rest of your life. You know, once you've established a reputation for something, then people's perception about this, and that's why it's so important to be so careful about this, because if you are talking to somebody in counsel and then you find yourself talking to the wrong people about this issue, and then it gets spread around a little bit, and that person knows that you're the only person they ever told, and now this story is getting back to them, guess who's going to get the blame for it? You are. And guess who's going to have a reduced credibility when it comes to counseling? And guess who's going to start developing a reputation? Because that person doesn't have the character that you do, and they're going to start talking about you. Well, you can't. Don't go to them unless you want your whole life story published in the newspaper. Well, that's not exactly how it happened, but that's how it's going to come across. And then people will wonder, well, would you like to see so-and-so? Oh, no. I got problems already. I don't need that kind of trouble. So we need to really be careful in that area. Just a few things on that. We have a responsibility as Christians to operate under the laws of love, the laws of faithfulness, and the laws of edification. In our pastoral ministry course, we explain those a little bit more fully, but the whole point is this. If we are going to exercise our Christian duty, it has to put certain cautions in us, because we're going to be operating in the best interest of that person in love, faithfulness, and building up and edifying. And here's just a few simple guidelines. Letter A, watch what you share with your spouse and other leaders concerning the counsel. If people are not part of the solution, then they can become part of the problem, and you just have to make sure that if you do end up sharing what's in that counseling session with anybody, it should be by permission from the counselee, and it should be upward in what we perceive to be the chain of command. And that is, if I'm going to those over me in the Lord, and I have the permission of the counselee to do so, and I would say, I want to ask your permission to share this with my overseer, share this with the pastor, share this with whoever, because I'd like to get some further wisdom on this. I'll be very careful about how I share that. And you get their permission, that's one thing. If you share with peers or you share with those below you, that becomes gossip, and it becomes, again, something that will come back and bite you. And sometimes even your spouse, and I mentioned this in the pastoral ministry class, your spouse wants to know everything that you know. And unfortunately, sometimes that actually can be gossip. And my wife had some issues with that one time, because one time she was asking me what I did that day. I said, well, I met with so-and-so, I met with so-and-so, did that. Well, what did you meet with so-and-so for? Oh, well, they had an issue they wanted to talk to me about. Well, what was it? Well, I'd really rather not say. Oh, we don't have any secrets in this marriage, and at first it was a problem. I had to explain to her, listen, honey, first of all, I don't think this person necessarily wants me to share with a lot of people. It's not that I don't trust you. Secondly, I don't want you to start looking at that person through the eyes of what I would have to tell you. I don't want you to change your relationship to them by virtue of the fact that they have this issue. And I said, also, I feel like in loyalty to them, I can't really broaden the circle of people that are involved in it. And finally, she kind of understood what it was, even though she didn't think we should have any secrets in marriage, going right down to the most minute detail. And I think sometimes, being faithful to my wife, am I unfaithful to that person, and so forth, and so it's a little tricky at times. But I think you need to learn how to unload on God. If you want to share it with somebody, share it with God. We don't want others to pick up an offense. We don't want others to begin to change their relationship, and we certainly don't want to undermine their credibility as a counselor. Be careful at home, especially in front of the children, not to discuss the problems of people. And I think this is especially true for pastors, but it's really true for anybody, that you don't start to run people down in front of your children, and all of a sudden your children start to know more about the people in the church than the average person in the congregation. When a child comes up to you and says something about your problem, that is a bad, bad thing. Letter C, do not repeat stories of the failures of others, especially when you do not have all the facts. I don't know what it is about Christians. Sometimes we shoot our wounded. Sometimes we relish the idea of somebody else having problems, and it makes us feel better about the problems that we have, I guess, or who we are. And so we can circulate a report, but we really don't have all the details. We don't really have all the facts. And the Bible is very clear about this in Exodus 23:1. You shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Letter D, do not allow requests for prayer to become a cover for gossip. Requests for prayer to become a cover for gossip. Sometimes would you help pray with me for so-and-so? We had to deal with this in our pastoral staff meetings sometimes. I had to say to guys, listen, I know you're going to have a counseling session with so-and-so today. We can pray about the session, but please don't give any details. I said, this prayer time can actually become a gossip session. And I said, this is not the right thing for us to be doing. Letter C, do not use people and their problems in joking with other leaders. It's easy to do that because you know a lot about people, but again, you're not being faithful to that person as a Christian. Number 2, we have a responsibility as a Christian, but secondly, we have a responsibility as Christian counselors to operate with a commitment to the Lord, a commitment to the person, and a commitment to the designated role that we have as a counselor. We do not want to betray people's trust. And here's some things just from a purely mechanical point of view. Letter A, make sure your counseling office is soundproof. If it is not, talk soft. I mean, we had to do some things in some of our offices to soundproof them. Make sure your waiting area is not the center of traffic flow, so everybody who's coming for counseling sits in front of everybody and so, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Oh, well, I came to work out my marriage. I came to do this. I came to do that. Well, that's embarrassing for people, so put them in the conference room, put them out of the flow of traffic, whatever, so that they aren't having to answer questions to everybody that comes by. Letter C, keep counseling notes under lock and key. When it's clear that the case is closed, maybe even destroy the notes, but in the meantime, keep them where people can't be looking at them. Letter D, ask permission to share with other leaders or pastors for your own outside advice and counsel. So you're protecting the people. All right, I'm going to have to move a little bit faster here for the sake of time. Letter J, be careful about what you identify to be the source of the problem. Be careful about what you identify to be the source of the problem. All right, when you are trying to figure out what the source of their problem is, your diagnosis of the problem will directly determine what you determine to be the solution of the problem. There are 4 main sources from which problems can arise. First of all is demonic activity. We're not ignorant of Satan's devices. We know he is a real creature out there, but I think a lot of things are ascribed to Satan. A lot of things are blamed on him that maybe he didn't have anything to do with. If the problem is diagnosed as demonic activity, obviously then the solution requires some form of deliverance ministry. All right, if we're dealing with the demonic, there's deliverance ministry. But even in the Bible, this is very, very rare among born-again Christians. You know, you look at Paul, who was writing to born-again Christians, and he described just about every problem you can possibly imagine. He never once in the whole time ascribed it to a demonic activity, but it was something that the Christians had to deal with. But on the other hand, we do know there is demonic activity, and there are people maybe who are not maybe fully Christian, if you will, who don't understand the battle that they're in. But the solution to the problems has to be consistent with the correct diagnosis of the problem. So if someone tries to treat a person as if they're troubled by a demon when actually they have a physical problem or actually they have just a problem with their own will, then that's not going to be the solution. The solution to everybody's problem isn't to cast it out. You can't cast out their personality. You can't cast out their character. You can't cast out those kinds of things. So one of them is demonic activity. Number 2 is physical illness. If the problem is diagnosed as brain disease, the solution requires either a miracle of healing or treatment by a professional in the medical field. Sometimes maybe they had brain damage. There are people that have had brain damage, or maybe it's a damaged brain disease of some sort that's actually causing aberrant behavior. And then we're going to pray for healing, obviously. Sometimes there's a chemical imbalance, and I didn't used to think this was a reality, but the more I witness this and read and so forth in relationship to this area, and I think we see it in natural life as people go through various stages of life, that sometimes when there's a hormone imbalance, they do things that they wouldn't normally do. They get angry when they wouldn't normally get angry. What are all the jokes about PMS for if there wasn't some truth to some of that? Well, if the problem is a chemical imbalance or hormonal imbalance due to some change of life, pregnancy, puberty, menopause, whatever it might be, the solution to the problem may include prayer, but more often than not, some assistance in the medical profession is also going to be necessary. We're talking about diagnosing and solutions. Number 4, living and lifestyle issues. Research psychologist E. Fuller Torrey says that about 5% of those who come to a psychiatrist are people with organic brain disease. About 75% are people with problems of living, and the other 20% will require closer examination to make a final judgment. In other words, maybe as much as 95% of the people that come for psychiatric care, it's just problems that they need to sort out with some sort of exercise of their will or a change of their lifestyle. If the issues are living and lifestyle related, we can apply all of these principles of biblical counseling that we have learned from this course. Praying for a marriage to be healed or trying to cast out a demon is not the answer for most situations. People come to me and say, would you pray for my friend's marriage? They really need, well, that prayer hopefully will do some good. But I'm telling you right now, it probably won't do any good. Why? Because they don't need prayer. They need counseling. They need change. And they got to do it. God does not all of a sudden, okay, God moves down upon him and changes this husband into another man. No. That doesn't usually happen that way. Yes, if it's brain disease, yes, he can heal the brain. He can heal the broken arm. He can heal, the blood pressure problem, perhaps. Yeah. But, not his attitude. We're not going to pray and heal his attitude. Those are things that he's got to deal with in his will and so forth, and that's why it's going to take more than I'll say to the person, yes, I'll pray for them, but you know what? You need to ask them to give a call, and maybe we can talk to them and maybe help sort this situation out, because it's going to take more than prayer to heal that marriage. All right, well, I see that we're out of time here for this session, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry over some of this session into the next session, and we'll just put it in another gear and go forward. So let's go ahead and close with that, take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back, finish this session, and go right into our next lesson on using illustrations in counseling. All right.